Welcome back from the break, and thanks for joining us as we begin the session integrating DEI practices into meetings. With virtual meetings here to stay and many organizations adopting meetings and events, we have the opportunity to hear today from strategic meetings management and procurement professionals about how this new era allows more opportunities for inclusivity, but also presents a new set of challenges. So we're fortunate now to welcome to the stage Automation Anywhere Senior Director, Global Procurement and Travel, Makiko Barrett, EY Global Virtual Event Advisor, Erin, Babarskis, and GE Senior Manager Operations SmartMeetings, Brenda, Crockerpierce. So I will wait for the ladies to join me here on the stage.
Hello. Hi there.
Hey, welcome.
Thank you.
Hi.
All right, and the gang's all here. Well, welcome and thanks so much for being part of this. We want to start off by talking about how the proliferation of virtual and hybrid meetings have impacted your organization. So Makiko, could you start us off by telling us what the impact has been for you?
Sure. So pre-pandemic, our employees were almost all in San Jose. So all of our meetings were in person, sometimes with the conference calls. But during COVID, everything had to shift to virtual all of a sudden. So it became 100% Zoom and Teams meeting for internal. Any customer face meetings became Zoom, 100%. Now that we're sort of coming out of pandemic, we started doing all kinds of meetings, in person, hybrid, virtual still. I don't think that's going to go away. So putting together a panel or speaking program is easier with virtual, but we are finding out that the cost is expensive. So it has some impact on budgets.
Mm-hmm. So, Erin, I couldn't help but notice your title, your unusual title, Virtual Event Advisor. Is that a post-pandemic title?
It absolutely is a post-pandemic title. So pre-COVID, obviously, virtual events kind of only happened as necessary. As we got into COVID, virtual events became a thing. And EY took the stance when we kind of did a redesign of our team. And I have a team of virtual event managers that I manage that specialize in virtual events and hybrid event execution. So we're really kind of looking at bridging that event strategy with the right event technology, looking at goals, objectives, and programs, and making sure that the technology fits. Because just because a platform can do X, Y, and Z and has all the sparkles and glitter, does not mean that you need it. And so, we look to kind of bridge that gap on the event strategy side with that correct technology to hopefully, have our internal clients have a successful meeting.
Excellent. And Brenda, as in-person meetings are becoming possible again, how much will you continue to use virtual meetings going forward?
Well, we are definitely continuing virtual meetings. I thought that hybrid would be, that would be the way to go. We're going to go back to hybrid. And for us, it's been more really about people are so cautious that they would prefer the virtual experience versus hybrid and separating people, because they cannot come and the cost alone. People are really anxious to meet in person, but I really find that they have to really justify why they need to have an in-person meeting versus doing it via virtually. Now you stop and think, I think the pandemic has really made us think very differently in the way we approach meetings and being together. Not that I don't want to be together. I think that in-person piece is great, but I feel like we have a lot of virtual. We're continuing with virtual.
And Erin, will your title change again, or do you think that virtual is here to stay?
I really do think virtual is here to stay. And I think what virtual has done for the event industry in general has really given another option. And so when you look at a way, it's given you another way to connect with your attendees between those live events. And I will be the first one to say that virtual events are not in-person events. And I live in the virtual event world. Are there use cases for hybrid? Absolutely. Does every event need to be hybrid? No. I think there's very certain use cases for hybrid. If the goals and objectives of your event, for example, is something like networking, I'm not going to say, please do a hybrid event because you want to network. Whereas if it's very education and it's content and it's something like this where you want to get information out to an audience and still have that connection, then absolutely do a virtual event. And there's ways to kind of, interweave those in different ways too. When you talk about hybrid, there's 75 different definitions of what a hybrid event is. And everybody finds a different way. And so when you look at kind of where everything is evolving to and going to, and yes, people are zoomed out, and people, we were just talking before this of back-to-back Teams meetings and Zoom meetings, and, I just need a break. Virtual is here to stay. We're on virtual all day. But it's a new way to engage your attendees from that live event, either prior or after, or, continuing to do so. So it's a new kind of avenue for the marketing mix, I think.
I agree. Makiko, as Brenda kind of alluded to previously, at one point it seemed that hybrid meetings would be standard operating procedure going forward, as it makes it possible for meetings to be more inclusive. But the fact that they require additional expense and resources to effectively serve two audiences at once has meant that many companies have backed away from embracing them. So what's the thinking at your company in this regard? My understanding is you've been doing more hybrid meetings lately. Is that correct?
Yes, we do. We do all, really. So in-person, hybrid, and virtual. For customer facing, I think in-person is still preferred. But in order to gain more attendance, doing virtual or hybrid helps, because you don't have to spend 3 days to attend a meeting, but you can be available for that 1 hour or 2 hours that they're interested in. So I think for that regards, it's really good. But of course, the cost is an issue. So we are trying to move back to in-person meetings. But having a hybrid as in the back pocket is definitely good for the attendance. Also, the problem I see, let me start with a positive note. So making it more inclusive is easier with virtual meeting because it's easier to book speakers. You don't, again, have to block their calendar for 3 days because, professional speakers tend to go from one event to the other. So it's easier to book anybody from anywhere in the world. So that makes it more inclusive because you can have so many different variety of speakers in one place. But making the experience consistent in hybrid setting is really, really challenging. In-person events, like Erin was saying, for networking, you can't really do it effectively virtually. If you have hybrid, you have one group that has great experience, and then you have another group who is kind of like audience in the back of the room, but not really engaged. So I see pros and cons, and I think for the foreseeable future, we will see mix of both virtual and in-person and hybrid.
And Brenda, as Makiko is referring to, the inclusivity that virtual and hybrid offer, it's also an opportunity to be more inclusive when it comes to the attendee, correct?
Correct. I feel it definitely is a way to make them feel more included, but it's all about the engagement in the content of what you deliver. If it's virtual, what you include, and I'm sure that Erin is very aware of that because of her role. But the inclusivity, you gather everyone, but you have to do it in the right respectful way as it relates to virtual and hybrid.
Yeah, and I think kind of as you kind of alluded to, you want those experiences to be equal. Virtual audience to have their great experience, and you have that in-person audience, and you want them to really have a great experience in person. And sometimes that doesn't mean just because you're doing something in person, you have to do the same thing on the virtual event. Think of almost as two events in one. Let's look at that experience for the virtual audience and find those touch points and those pieces that you're offering in that in-person event, and how do we incorporate it on the virtual side. And on the other side of things, let the in-person people have their own experience in some of those. It doesn't always have to marry the entire way through the event, but you want all of those individuals attending the event to come out with an amazing experience.
So, Erin, have remote and hybrid meetings created new challenges and opportunities regarding diversity and equity?
I think so. I think, to everybody's point, it's very easy to incorporate DEI within a virtual event. I mean, everything from, is the platform accessible? Can you offer closed captioning? To does it support screen readers and live translation, and all those little pieces that sometimes I think we forget about in an in-person event. So there are ways to make things more inclusive. The other thing it does is, I think Brenda and Makiko alluded to it earlier, is it opens up your audience. So for somebody who may not be able to attend because maybe they're taking care of an elder or a child or something, it allows those people to join your conference. And so, maybe they can't travel, maybe they don't want to travel. And so it gives your audience a wider base of people to pull from. Maybe people will attend a virtual event that have never ever gone to your in-person event. And now you have a business case that says, hey, here's my business case to look at a hybrid event, because I'm going to pull people that that have never traditionally attended, and now I'm pulling a bigger audience. And we've seen that with some of our hybrid events. We had an event, I think we expected about 1,200 people in person, and it's typically 2,000 people in person. Because of COVID, we were expecting 1,200 people in person. It wound up to be 500 people in person, and we had 2,500 people online. So, you don't know what that audience is going to do or look like. And, right now, kind of attendance on in-person events can go either, oh, I didn't book enough space, to, oh, now I need to give up space. It's kind of a crapshoot of your attendance. And so I think, a hybrid event for the right business case makes sense.
I think now the event space is harder and harder to book as well. So you try to lock in a contract like 6 months in advance, and there could be another surge of COVID, which we just experienced in California. So we had a lot of cancellation for in-person events and more opportunity for virtual. I also feel that positive thing about virtual is like there are a lot of people putting their comments in the chat. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't raise their hand and talk in front of a big audience. So for that, I think we heard from a lot more different, people, not just like the speakers in the audience who would like to get like 90% of the speaking time, right? You get a lot more attendance from like quieter, shy attendant who is comfortable putting their messages in the chat, but not to speak in front. So for that, I think it's good. So I do see both pros and cons again.
I was going to say too, I mean, just to talk about kind of just the hybrid piece and how you really look at that with inclusion. I just recently discovered a company by the name of Discover Live. I don't know, Erin or Makiko, if you've ever heard of them, that really is starting to really focus on D&I really diversity, but really bringing people to an event along with the people that are going to the event in person. So they really carry you on that journey, and they create two separate paths where you can see where are people going. Maybe they don't have to have it. You don't want to know that they're going to this winery and they're going to drink and have a great time, but you want to find another way to engage them. And I feel like that is important because some people can't afford to travel, whether they just don't have the budget to do that, or like you said, maybe have family issues. And I think it's super important for somebody that's planning the meeting to really think of that, really put themselves in their shoes and other shoes.
Mm-hmm. Good point. And also, Brenda, you were talking in our pre-call about affinity groups. How is that? How are those groups? How do those groups function, and how are they impacted by this virtual world?
Our affinity groups, some of them, let's say, like our Women's Network or APAF, and there's so many groups that used to meet in person, and now they're realizing, wow, we can really reach more of an audience and have more inclusion if we do this virtually. And so while I had thought, oh my gosh, as soon as we start coming out of the pandemic, we're going to start seeing a lot more requests for in-person or hybrid. I'm not seeing that at all. I'm seeing much more of the virtual piece because it worked. And there are platforms, and we use Teams, but they're in Cvent, and there's opportunities to engage with those platforms or whatever platform you use to make sure that you have the best experience, and that include groups like for breakouts, that people can talk like that. So even with Remo, you can talk amongst the tables, and I think that that's super important.
Well, Makiko, you've been in the pre-call talking about, and just earlier in this call talking about how, it's a balancing act to deal with those alpha speakers you talked about. But it is, and it's harder to read the room, but it is easier in some ways if you manage it right to get more people involved. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. So when I think of DEI, I not just race or religious group or LGBTQ, but I also think about being inclusive to all of the speakers, let's say on a panel, right? So I talked about alpha speakers who like to dominate the stage and want to talk all the time. If I'm moderating a session, then I want to make sure that everybody is heard on the panel. It is somewhat harder to do virtually because it is easier to cut off people. Also, as a moderator, I need to read the audience, how they are responding to the content. And then I might switch the direction of the question or the discussion during the panel. It is hard to do that virtually when a lot of people have their cameras turned off and on mute. All you see is name, but not facial expression. It's hard to put a meaningful meeting if nobody's engaged, but it is hard to read the room in virtual events and easier to do so in in-person meetings.
Erin, are DEI issues something that you personally are focused on, or is there an individual or a team in place at your company that focuses on these issues and that you work with?
So we do have teams within EY that focus on very different parts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we work with the technology team mostly that handles kind of how do you make technology more diverse and inclusive. And so, when they look at it, it's everything from can you change from light to dark within a platform? Can you have closed captioning? How, at a bare minimum, what's the standards that they're putting in place to ensure that you have just a baseline of kind of DEI compliance? And at a minimum, what we do for all of our events, whether it's internal or external, and it's, the ones that we're involved in, I can tell you 100% at a minimum have closed captioning in English. And that's available whether it's through a AI, closed captioning, or maybe it's a pre-record where it's baked in. So there are some different options that we use to, make sure we're hitting that minimum standard that people are looking for. We do ask the questions to the other platforms. All of our platforms are vetted through our technology, and so they do look for, is there a high contrast mode? Does it work with screen magnifiers or visual modifications? Does a platform have keyboard shortcuts, which I think people, forget about? Do you need a mouse, or do you need a scroll pad to access that? And so, can you access via phone if it's just audio? So, there's all these little intricacies within DEI and the technology side that I don't think people think about. It's the same as in person. We look at accessibility within hotels. A wheelchair accessible room is very different from, an accessible room in general, but not many people know that unless you've been in that situation. So, we really kind of work with that technology team to do so on our platforms and on the different events that we have.
Excellent. And Brenda, I know you've got a diversity and sustainability team that you work with. How do they interface with you in the meetings area?
So, we have not really started to interface on the meetings and events side, honestly, but they are very focused on diversity and inclusion in the workplace in general, overall. And, they're focused on there's so much, solving society's most pressing challenges. It requires such a diverse group. We're a huge company like EY, there's a little moving tentacles all the time. And they are really trying to kind of achieve diversity and inclusion through hiring, through educating employees. And I think, they know that I'm very interested in talking about diversity and inclusion in meetings and events. We just haven't done that yet. But I think helping to create, part of it is helping to create a safe environment, teaching people that they need to really look at inclusion, not only just with people that attend your call, but with your suppliers. Even hotel staff and your customers. And I think that for me is a big key, and just being open and listening and learning and to see how you can integrate it into your meetings program. That's what I would say.
Excellent. Great. And Makiko, how are DE&I issues addressed at your company, and how do you participate in that activity?
Yeah, so it is very, very important to our company. We are officially certified minority-owned company. So as you can see, it's a very important topic for us. One of the founders became our social impact officer, and she leads the ESG council that I am part of. So she drives all the initiatives in the company. She made it mandatory for all the employees to attend unconscious bias training. And she spearheaded changing the travel policy to protect women travelers by giving them additional guidance and, car service options in India, etc. Also issued guidance on LGBTQ travelers going to a conference in some of the Middle East. Like certain ways they should behave to keep themselves safe. So there have been a lot of initiatives as part of the ESG Council. And then also, I really like the fact that she invests in future. So that's part of the equity. We donate our robotic automation software to nonprofit groups that gives access to all the students so they can learn and they can become engineers and make good income, going to college. So I'm very proud of the initiatives that we're doing.
And Makiko, my understanding is that when it comes to meetings, that there are some other considerations that you've taken on, time of booking those meetings, meals, safety requirements. Can you talk about those issues?
Yeah. So in particulars to meeting, accessibility, like Erin was talking about, is very important. But we also pay special attention to meals because our founders are all from India. We have a lot of employees from India as well, and a lot of them are vegetarians or vegans. So, I think basic conferences usually offers regular meals and vegetarians, but now there's so many different requirements that we should be aware of. Before COVID, it was a little bit easier because we just did a huge buffet and everybody can eat whatever. But, during COVID, you couldn't do buffet. And if you do plated lunches, then it has to be pre-ordered, right? And if now we're coming back to buffet, but now you have to pay for the servers, etc. So that's budgetary issue. But we spend a lot of time making sure that everybody is included. We're not excluding any particular group just because they're vegan. They only could eat salad during lunch. It's not main entree. So we really pay special attention to those.
And Brenda, you pay attention to those areas as well. Can you talk about what you do when it comes to meals?
Well, even just as part of registration, besides just dietary restrictions, you need to really, even ask pronouns, right? Today, you need to be respectful of pronouns and to address people the way they want to be addressed. I guess even for hearing impaired, sometimes people just don't speak out, right? They want to feel included. So how do you find a way to include them without making them feel like they stand out? So I think it's super important to kind of find ways to do that. And even just as I'm thinking about this, and something that I may do is with our affinity groups, we have so many, even having open dialogue with them. What would it mean to you? What's important to you if you were attending a meeting and filling out registration? How could we be better in the meetings and events space to understand diversity and inclusion? I can't talk without my hands, you can see.
So now that we've gone into the era of remote working, Erin, has that necessitated the creation of new kinds of meetings?
I don't know if they're new kinds of meetings. I think it's kind of bringing things, that were once in person into the virtual kind of sphere. I think we're finding, the technology is evolving and continues to evolve to give us new options and new ways of doing things. Everybody wants to talk about the metaverse and, how that's going to impact and, what's next. But, I think ultimately, the value comes from on the virtual side from the content and the connections you make, and maybe even a small curated breakout or, a chat, or, what kind of options you have within that meeting to actually really have a great experience. And so, I think that the evolution of the new way of working has opened up technology to a group of people who are maybe very technology adverse, that now people who maybe didn't love technology at one point have been, exposed to technology like Zoom, like Teams, and, are embracing it. I mean, everybody has to use it at this point. So, I think that individuals have more options with the technology, and you have a group of people who know how to use technology, whereas prior to COVID, how many people were trying to get on Zoom for the first time during COVID, and we were sending emails upon emails of this is how you access Zoom, and now it's a second way of doing things. So
yeah.
It's just it's the natural evolution of the technology as we move on.
So, Brenda, what impact have you seen from remote working as far as creating new kinds of meetings are concerned?
Well, how about burnout, right? That I feel like you're always on and connected, and I feel like that is what I've seen, and I know all of us have seen that, you tend to meet more often, which is good. I know that Makiko had talked about yesterday when we were just talking a little bit. She had talked about how, you used to meet at the water cooler, right? And have conversation there. Now you don't really have that, especially if you're not in an office or if you're remote anymore. So people want to meet more often, and they want you to be on camera as much as possible. And so I feel like that, that's what I've seen. I love the fact that we have new technology. I love that. Look where we've come in these past 2 years. I mean, it's amazing. It's really pushed everyone forward, but it also has its drawbacks. And I just see that you're meeting all the time, basically.
Mhm.
Don't you think? Anybody?
For sure.
Not completely.
Yeah. I would agree. And I think to that end, it's us as planners need to be very cognizant of that. And you can't put an 8-hour meeting for a virtual attendee, even on the hybrid side. You have to be very considerate. You got to remember that people in a in-person audience, they can break away and look around the room and maybe go out for a, coffee or a Coke or whatever and walk around. Whereas if you're an virtual attendee, you are stuck to your computer. You're looking at the computer. You're not necessarily looking away, but maybe you're listening, but you're on and you're online. And so we just need to be considerate of kind of what that agenda looks like as well.
So Makiko, how has remote working and dispersed workforces impacted the way that you work?
So we have not been excluded from the Great Resignation for sure. And after we kind of starting to ramp up, I hired a lot of people because a lot of people left. I have 5 people who's reporting to me, and I actually have not met them in person yet. Like not even once. The interview was by Zoom, and all of the meetings have been on Zoom. So it's quite different. Also, before pandemic, 90% of our employees were in San Jose. So it was easy to meet. Like Brenda was saying, it's easy to meet people by coffee machines or water coolers, meet people from different departments. But now I feel like we're more stuck to our little group. Unless you're working on a project, you don't have the opportunity to meet people. Like I have no business talking to system engineers in our company, right? So that's been really difficult. Also, I feel that creating the team report and also like sense of belonging has been challenging because of the virtual work that we do.
Brenda, you were going to make a comment and I cut you off. What were you going to say?
Oh, don't worry. No, I was just going to say, I feel that I think to add to everyone's point, I feel that you have to be, if going back to inclusivity, you really have to, everybody's working so many hours, 5 times as hard as they ever have in the past. And you really need to consider these meetings that you have. Are they really necessary? Could you put something in an email, or, consider taking time to, you may have team meetings and your team is global. Like Makiko, I think you may have said that, the team is global, and you don't want to have your meetings at 9 a.m. in the morning for the APAC region all the time. Maybe you can switch it up, and just think of that, and think of people have families. Not everybody is like you.
I think that's really the pain point for me. Our shared services moved to India during pandemic for cost-cutting measures. So if I need any help from IT, a lot of times my meetings are at 9 p.m. at night. I also hate to organize a meeting myself for my team. So I have people in India, I have people in West Coast, East Coast, and middle. It's gonna be outside of regular business hours for somebody. And I really hate to initiate that meeting myself. I don't mind attending meetings at night sometimes, but now it's becoming a lot more frequent.
Yeah, you were telling us when we spoke yesterday that everyone in the event planning area except one person got laid off after the pandemic hit.
Yeah. It was tough. We did quite a bit of downsizing like 2 months in. Everybody thought we'll be back to work in the office after 2 weeks. And then now here we are after 2 years. Our office is open, but we have hot desks. So you have to book a desk and go in for meetings only. So event planning department, they have a big department before, but like only a month in, everybody but one person got let go. And the one person was like Erin, who had extensive experience in running virtual events. And right now it's coming back, but the budget is not back 100%. So we're hiring contractors or outsourcing event management to third-party agencies, but we're not able to actually hire full-time employees who knows our culture, who knows our employees, and who knows our expectations. So that's an additional challenge.
Erin, what was the impact on your team from the lockdown?
As far as our team, we did a full restructure of our team on a global scale. However, the people that were kind of moved off or let go from the meetings and events team, they tried to keep within EY and put them on other teams. And so, they were very successful in doing that. So nobody really lost their jobs. They just got kind of reshuffled to either a new area or a new place within EY. So, I think EY did the best they could to keep as much, our leadership did as much as they could, as best they could to keep as many people within EY to really minimize those layoffs.
Also, Brenda able to pivot to virtual quickly and not lose any team members.
We were very fortunate that we did not lose our team because we realized how quickly we needed to pivot to virtual and really come up with a virtual strategy. And, I do a lot of benchmarking with other companies too to see what they do. And I think that's super important to kind of see how they're planning. And I think we learned together. And so I was able to, save the team. But I know in our other businesses, some of them lost an entire teams. And now they're struggling to get back. They're just now starting to hire and it's really hard to find, there are people out there, but they're not the same people. People have moved on. And I feel like, it's harder and harder to find the right people this quickly. And it's like a tsunami, everything's come back so fast.
And I think that's on both sides though, right? Because
Yes.
you notice it with the suppliers you've traditionally worked with. They don't know your company or your culture as much as they used to.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Makiko, I was going to ask, so we've heard so much about labor shortages on the supplier side. What's your experience there? And are there opportunities in working with your suppliers for them to create more diverse workforces?
Labor shortage is definitely a critical issue, especially here in California. I mean, I'm sure it's all over the nation, but especially where I am in Silicon Valley, tech workers are getting paid pretty high wages. And then during the pandemic, hotels started shutting down, restaurants started shutting down. People left the industry, a lot of California to go to lower cost of living places. So we're trying to ramp things back up, but there are no people, right? They don't want to come back. So it's been difficult, getting quotes from hotels, any meeting venues have been challenging. When the hotel opened up, the hotel was open, but room service is not available. Restaurants are still closed because they can't find the chef, they can't find restaurant workers. So it continues to be a challenge. I'm really hoping that the suppliers will take this opportunity to bring in new group of people and educate them. So I'm sure there are a lot of people who might be in different industry, that they want to be educated to be part of the travel and meetings industry. So I am really hoping to see that initiative from my supplier side, to get them onboarded and then ramp up the industry again. And what I can do as a buyer's perspective is really to support those suppliers. I added questions in my RFPs about their diversity programs, what's on the roadmap. I know it's not possible to change overnight for anybody, but what do they have in roadmaps? Do they have a diversity officer? Add just a bunch of questions and then put a score on it so that those with those programs will come to the top of the RFP. As if it becomes important for the buyers, I think suppliers will move in that direction.
Excellent. Anything to add to that, Brenda?
No, the only thing I would add is educating, educating your stakeholders, really making them aware, including them. I'm talking about inclusion, including them to not after the fact, but educating them before. Have options, talk about options like, I understand you want to do this meeting in Vegas, but this may be an issue. Do you have a second option? And talk to include your suppliers because they're struggling too, I find. And I feel like talking with them is very important to maybe get the result you want. It has to be kind of, working together.
Erin, anything you want to add regarding opportunity to work with your suppliers to encourage them to take this opportunity to create more diverse workforce?
Yeah, I think Brenda hit it on the head. It's really a team effort right now, and being open with your stakeholders and your suppliers. Stakeholders always have a very high standard that an expectation. And right now, when you look at the staffing shortages, we need to have some kind of realistic expectations. And maybe that's talking to the stakeholder and saying, hey, you're not going to get, X, Y, and Z at your meeting, but here's what we can do. And, maybe talking to the supplier to come up with a solution that, that plan B or plan C to, whatever it is they're asking for. We're seeing that across the board. I mean, it's not just hotels and it's not just restaurants, it's the AV companies, it's every supplier that you're working with. And, I know even some of the external kind of, meeting associations are even starting to pitch jobs as, you look at those industry jobs like construction or, whatever, they're starting to really pitch the hospitality industry in that way to the younger generation so that, they know that these jobs are here and they know that these positions are here. Please come and consider us in the future. And so I think, it's not just from, what can we do here right now? It's a bigger industry, education that our industry needs to pick up and really kind of, these jobs are amazing and they're fun. And, this industry is great. And how do we really kind of push that forward in a different way to the next generation?
Excellent. Well, we're running out of time, but before we do, I'd be happy to ask your questions of our panel if you'll put them in the Q&A tab, and a few of you already have. So what are some of the top 3 cost-contained changes you would recommend to make a meeting more inclusive? Who wants to take that first?
I think cost contained is the issue.
Yes, indeed.
But I think it's easier for virtual events to have different type of speakers. Like I said, they don't need travel time. They don't need to block 3-4 days on their calendar to participate to your event. So if you are putting together a virtual event, that's your opportunity to reach out to speakers that you don't normally book, but just different type from any continent that you want, really. I think that's the easiest one.
Agree.
Brenda, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't really have anything to add. I think that it's really about creative thinking, right? You really have to think creatively of how can you deliver what you want to deliver creatively without spending a lot of money. So you have to really look at alternatives. And that's why connecting with suppliers and really talking it through, trying to tell them what you're trying to achieve, and talking to other companies. We're all in this boat together. I don't know, Erin, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think Makiko kind of hit on it a little bit, is, finding, she had mentioned hybrid is super expensive. Well, if you do the entire meeting hybrid, to your point, Brenda, thinking creatively, maybe we take that and do a smaller virtual event for an hour, and maybe not do the full event, hybrid or all in person. So, being creative with your formats to execute that event is a very, very cost contained solution, because what you spend in AV for a hybrid event, maybe you just do a broadcast, or maybe you do, a smaller virtual event that, is more budget friendly for the inclusivity and, to add to your audience as well.
Another question is, from an AV perspective, do you find hybrid meetings to add so much cost to the equation? I can say yes. So do you have any cost reducing suggestions? You want to start first this time, Erin?
Sure. This is a loaded question. So when you look at live meetings, right, and the way hotels are booking right now, we're seeing meetings booked back to back to back. So when you're considering hybrid, you have to make sure that you have that setup time. And as we know, you don't want to pay to do an overnight setup. And so, can you get into a hotel to allow you to have that setup time at a reasonable rate? I would say number one. And if you're doing a hybrid event, it's not we're going to add it at the 11th hour. That conversation has to happen in those very early planning stages. Even if it's a consideration, it's easier to ask up front and have that plan A, B, and C than it is to going, oh, we're going to go fully live, to, oh, now we're considering hybrid, because that's going to change your budget consideration throughout, and maybe change food and beverage, and maybe affect other parts of your meeting. So I always say it's easier to think of things ahead of time and plan for those than it is to add them in at the 11th hour. So from that AV perspective, you're looking at that setup costs, those, costs for, your all the different kind of AV roles that you need to execute that hybrid event. There's additional staffing that has to happen. You have to double up on some of the roles and responsibilities from the AV companies. So, if you know what those roles are and looking at those roles, maybe you can cut some of that out of the AV quote. But, I think that labor setup cost is huge, because, what you pay for an overnight setup versus a day before setup is very different.
True.
Good stuff.
I would also add that during the contracting phase, I know that AV contract usually comes after you sign the master service agreement.
Mm-hmm.
I start to ask those at the beginning, because depending on the venue you use, the cost is so different. So get the rate first. Also, you tend to get more negotiation power when it's in-house, rather than them using some third-party vendor coming to the hotel. Also, of course, if you have a large event, then everything is negotiable. But for small events, I ask for the rate first. In-house or third-party, those are the questions I always ask.
And final question here, any recommendations on good resources that your team are educated on DEI for events, whether live, hybrid, or virtual? Any thought about that, Brenda?
Well, you can ask me. We internally right now, it's more educating our, within the company. So I don't know if I really can give an intelligent answer to that, because I think we're all learning it together. And but no tools that I have used personally for DEI. Erin, maybe Makiko. I
think Google it. it's like when I was a student, I had to go to the library, right? Like it's like before internet, and now everything is just ready for you at your fingertips. So, you know, I would say every TMC has published articles on that. Like Harvard Business Review, they published a ton of article about how to be inclusive. It's so easy to find. You just need to find time to read them through and, you know, what's relevant to your company and what you can do as an individual. But being part of like a huge, you know, bigger department like ESG Council that I'm part of, that helps a lot because it's not just me, one person trying to make changes, but as a company, you have a lot more leverage.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, do you have a last word on a recommendation to other strategic meetings managers about how to successfully integrate DEI practices into your meetings and your meeting teams?
Yeah, I think to answer the question of the resource piece, I would say, you know, there are kind of industry resources out there with the different industry organizations. They've all had articles. Your platforms have all written articles on accessibility on those individual platforms. And so, you know, and some of them actually have best practices around how to incorporate, you know, the DEI within that actual platform that you're utilizing. Teams and Zoom, you know, they have articles too. But when you're getting into the more complex platforms like Renmo, is it Remo, right? Remo.
Remo.
You know, I would bet that Remo has some accessibility standards and some accessibility options and articles that they have within their platform already. It's just working with your suppliers to understand what the options are that are available. You know, like I said, as far as resources industry-wide, you look at the bigger industry organizations, a lot of those have, you know, specific meeting and event related practices for DEI and how to incorporate it into events, either hybrid, virtual, or in person.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your great insight, Erin, Brenda, and Makiko. I really appreciate it. And please give them a thunderous applause in the chat.